Hi there, it's November the 4th, and we're continuing our journey through the letter to the Hebrews, and we're in chapter 6, reading the whole chapter from 1 to 20. At the beginning of this chapter, the writer is still in this parenthesis, he's still in this kind of bimeadow that he's on at the moment, worrying about the fact of whether his readers can actually take in what he's saying, because they seem to have been pulled back to their old traditions and their old ways in Judaism. And that's emphasized here at the beginning of chapter 6, where he basically says to them, let's move on from the elemental things being these teachings that he talks about. Now, we might think these are all about the Christian things, but also there's a mix in there of the Jewish aspects as well. So repentance was something that was constantly repeated. Daily prayer asked God to complete repentance for a Jew. There are various washings. So a Jew would go to the mikveh every week, various laying on of hands for relieving of sin, and the ongoing arguments about the resurrection. And the writer is basically saying, don't get caught up in these practices, in this kind of trying to repeat it. So because actually we have done this, it's been laid, the foundation's been laid. And he says, of course, it's impossible to lay a foundation again once it's been laid. And he says what we're actually doing is we're seeking to build on that foundation, not to go back and lay it again. And he says actually it's impossible to lay that foundation. It's like crucifying Jesus again if we keep going over those things. And actually now what we're dependent on is the fruit that's produced, whether that's fruit to the good fruit or whether that's thorns and thistles. And there's a real warning here that if good fruit's not produced, that's not good for us. That's going to lead to our problems later on down the line. So the writer is really encouraging his readers to continue in the good work. And he says, actually, I hope better things for you. He says, I know better things of you, that actually you are imitating the faith of those who've gone before, and that you are seeking to follow this one whose name you love. And so he's looking for them to reach that goal. He's not saying you are rejected, but he's saying we can move forward. We have this hope. And then he goes on at the end of this chapter to talk about this hope that has been received in Jesus. And he points back to Abraham. Abraham's call, again, for the Jews, this was a key figure in the whole story, the whole unfolding story of Messiah, because Abraham is the one who trusted God, the one who turned to God. And in this particular reference that the writer to the Hebrews quotes at chapter 6, he's quoting from Genesis 22, when Abraham has not held back his son from God, but has offered him on the altar, and then God has said, don't kill him. And God says, now I see that you're not going to withhold anything from me, that you are really prepared to walk with me. And therefore God says, I swear to you that I will bless you, and you will be a blessing, and that I will multiply you. And this oath, says the writer to the Hebrews, it's like a double confirmation of God's promise. So he says there are two things that God has done that he's unable to change, that are what we call immutable. They're not movable. And that's his promise that he made to Abraham, but he's also confirmed it in Genesis 22 with this oath. With this oath he swears by himself. And the writer says here that God actually swears by his own name, because there's nothing greater that he can swear by. He's not sworn by heaven and earth. He's not sworn by anything he's made. He's actually made his oath dependent on himself. And therefore, the writer says this means it can't be broken. There's no way that God can go back on his word, because he's actually promised by himself to be true. And therefore he says, because of that, we can go to Jesus. We can anchor ourselves in Jesus. There's this wonderful picture of the sailors getting out of the storm, coming into harbour, putting their anchor into the place where Jesus has gone. He says Jesus has gone beyond the veil. That refers to the veil in the temple or the tabernacle, beyond which God's holy presence dwelt. He says Jesus has now gone in physically himself into that holy presence, and therefore we have a link to that. And this is our hope, our certain hope, that we can be sure in. And so we can be filled with that sense of purpose, goal, future, because God has offered us in Jesus an anchor that that we can rely on, that we can hold on to. What an amazing promise then, that we're promised not this continual repetition of vain things, but actually we're called into this goal, this hope, this holding on to Jesus, who has already gone into the presence of God and invites us as our high priest to come into his throne room as well. Let's go there, let's enjoy and let's benefit from his presence today. Have a very good November the 4th.